Podcasts on unctv.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV.
Funding for In the Garden is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV, and by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more.
Coming up, protecting plants and getting your garden ready for winter. Next. Hi, welcome to In the Garden. I'm Bryce Lane. When the fall nights start to get cold, it's time to prepare your garden for winter. On today's show, I'll share easy ways to protect less hardy plants from the cold. And if you love to garden year-round, there's nothing like having your own home greenhouse. I'll show you how to use a greenhouse to enjoy plants during the winter and to get a jump start on your garden for the spring. Just because a plant is touted as hardy doesn't mean it doesn't need to be prepared for the winter, for that cold weather. Take the elephant ears, the alocasias and the calocasias. Now you can see here this alocasia, and this one's called Portora, has really been hit hard by the frost. But that doesn't mean it's not hardy. It's touted as zone 7. Now there are some elephant ears that you do need to dig up and protect in the wintertime, and there are others that are said to be hardy. This one is, but we still need to protect the crown from that cold weather and from too much moisture. So after the frost hits this plant like this and it's all droopy and whatnot, here's what we can do to help it get ready. I've got my cultivating knife and I'm going to cut these leaves off, and in fact I'm going to try to cut it all the way back down to ground level. Now fortunately this cultivating knife has a serrated margin and I can cut it. Still quite juicy, as you can see there, but then take all that and dispose of it. But now I've got it down to ground level. This crown, there's a large corm inside down in the ground. This needs to be protected. Now I could take my rake and rake some leaves and put it on top, but folks, the alocasias and the calocasias that are winter hardy are very sensitive to not just cold, but cold, moist soil. If it's too wet, that big corm's going to rot. So what we might want to do is insulate it and protect it from too much weather, too much rain. You could put leaves over, but then the rain's going to go through, and if your soil doesn't drain well, it could rot out. Here's what I like to do. Just take a bale of pine straw, place it right on top of that growing center. Now this provides the insulation, but it also diverts the rain. When the rain falls, it'll be absorbed by the bale, and it may not get as much water into the soil. Then you just take some leaves, bring it up around the base to insulate it, and you're ready to go. Now with the calocasias, here's one called Pineapple Princess. It's a smaller growing plant, again, touted as zone 7. Come through and you would do the same thing. Cut those top pieces off like so. And what I found with some of the calocasias, you could do the pine straw bale right on top, or take your rake, take the leaves that are falling from the trees around there, and just rake a pile right up on top. Now, if you've noticed that it might be raining a little bit too much, you might be getting a lot of moisture, you could divert to the pine straw bale midway through the winter. Once the chance of frost is gone next spring, it'll be time to collect up all those leaves and expose the ground. Pick up the bale of pine straw, move it away, and you'll be ready to go. Those plants will start to sprout and grow in the same spot next year. If you're like me, you love to grow plants in containers to use to decorate around your patio, your deck, or even incorporate into your landscape. And I like to grow temperate woody plants, plants that really survive in the dead of winter and that cold. But just because they're temperate and woody doesn't mean that the ones in containers don't need protection. Folks, it's the roots that are extremely sensitive. And when these plants are growing in the landscape, the soil acts as insulation and the roots never get below freezing. But if these roots freeze or get below about 27 degrees, we can have significant damage and even death. So here's a little trick to protect your temperate woody plants and plants in containers during the wintertime. The first thing you want to avoid is direct sunlight. So find the north side of your house or a wall in a shed that faces north where it doesn't get direct sunlight, and that'll moderate the temperature. It might keep it cool, but it'll keep it even. And you place the plants right up against that side of the house because the house provides insulation. I'm going to take this large plant right here and move it right in this spot. But here's another little trick. The rain barrel. It's dark color and it's filled with water, and water has that great ability to absorb heat and then slowly give it off. It's a wonderful insulator, and so I'm going to use that for one side of insulation for protecting these plants. And I'll move this deciduous evergreen here. This is Taxodium. Move it here. And folks, I've even propagated some plants later in the season. They're going to require some protection. These are Daphne, that winter Daphne. Put them back in through here. And you know, sometimes I'll buy plants with a great hope of planting them and never get around to it. These hosta haven't been planted yet. Put them in there to protect them as well, and I'll worry about planting those next year. So now I've got these in through here. Take this red bud, place it right up against the plants. And of course, when you bunch them together, that really helps to insulate them as well, protect them from the cold like this. And then our friend pine straw. It's a great mulch, but it's also a good insulator. And I just take the pine straw bales, and you get a few bales, place them up against the containers like so. Now you've got a blanket, if you will, around those plants. And the only other thing left to do is to protect the top a little bit. And I like to rake my leaves and use the leaves that I rake for composting, and I like to insulate the top with those leaves. So I'll get some leaves, put them on the top. Make sure that you keep these plants well watered because a moist root system is also better able to tolerate the cold. So here's an easy, simple approach to protecting your plants in the wintertime. Here is another easy technique to protect your temperate woody plants that are in containers from the severe winter cold. Dig a hole, take that container and actually place it down in the hole and cover it over with soil. Now you might ask, why would you want to do that when you can protect it on the north side of your house? Well, this is Edgeworthia chrysantha, the Korean paper bush, and it has flowers that are big and beautiful like chrysanthemums, and it flowers in February and March, really in the dead of winter. Beautiful yellow flowers that are fragrant. So I don't want to hide this plant behind my house, up around that pine straw. I'd like to put it in a place where people will be able to appreciate it, but I still need to protect those roots. Now, this is a cultivar called Red Dragon, and these beautiful chrysanthemum-like flowers are a bright red color, and I really love this plant. It was given to me by a student of mine named Kelsey, and I just want to display it next to the other Edgeworthia that I have out in the front yard where people come in and they'll be able to enjoy the flowers and the fragrance. So I've got my hole dug. I'm going to take the plant, place it right down in the ground. I'm not planting it, and take your soil and you fill it in as if you were planting it. It takes a little while. You want to make sure that soil gets in all those spaces around the pot to provide that insulation. Now, you don't need to pack it down, just take it and put it in and around the plant. Next year, when the spring comes, I'll take it out of the hole. I might grow it in the container on my patio, but this thing is a real fast-growing plant. I think I'm going to need to find a place for it permanently. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, why didn't you just plant it right here? Well, it's in a spot that it's going to grow too big right by the walkway. So now I'll just cover it over. And I may use a little bit of mulch to hide the pot, but this will provide all the insulation that that plant needs. It'll contain the root system. Next spring, I'll be able to dig the plant up, place it where I want to plant it, or keep it right in the container. Well, the plant's all in place. I've got it all covered over. It's well insulated, but it's also in a place where people will be able to appreciate it all winter long. If you want to get more serious about growing and protecting many of your garden plants in the winter, then perhaps a home greenhouse is the route you'd want to take. Now folks, take caution. Home greenhouses can be very time consuming, can cost quite a bit of money, and require a lot of attention. However, the benefits often far outweigh the efforts. Now, you can design and build your own home greenhouse, or you could build one from a kit. Here's a kit that was graciously donated by the Greenhouse Megastore. It's a 6 by 8 foot greenhouse made with a plastic sheathing, and it snaps together. But remember, it often takes at least a day or two for assembly, and you need to be able to read those directions. Now you might ask, why would I want to have a home greenhouse? What are the benefits? What would be the reasons why I would have one? Well, there are 4 main reasons for having a home greenhouse. One would be to overwinter and protect tender plants from your garden. Now these would be Zone 8 plants. Things like you see here, the variegated ginger, and perhaps these colocasias that might not make it through a severe winter outdoors in the landscape. Here, this structure would provide overwintering protection from temperatures that get well below freezing. That'll be the first reason. The second reason is to protect and grow subtropical and tropical plants. Many of the annuals that we grow in our landscape are tropical and subtropical in nature and will not tolerate freezing. Well, we might take a cutting of a coleus, for instance, put it in a pot, get it to root, and overwinter it, protect it in the greenhouse. So there's another good use. The third would be to get an early start on the spring season. We can plant lots of seeds that we're going to grow in our garden early, maybe February and March. We sow seeds, we get those plants growing and they get an early start. Then we take those seedlings and put them out into the garden once the chance of frost is gone. And the last reason would be to actually grow some of those cool season vegetables in containers in the greenhouse. Lettuce and radish and perhaps even spinach could be grown in the greenhouse. We could harvest those leaves of those plants and use them in our homes for cooking. So those are the 4 primary reasons. And folks, if you don't have at least one good reason for having that home greenhouse, then you might not want to think about doing it. But if you do have one reason, then a home greenhouse would be the way to go. If you choose to use a home greenhouse, there are some basic steps you need to take to be successful. First and foremost, place the greenhouse on open ground. That way any excess water will drain away. Now what we've done here is we've placed landscape fabric down and then put down 2 inches of gravel to collect that water. And that's a good surface to use. Now the landscape fabric will prevent weeds from coming up through, so you won't hopefully not have to weed anything on the ground. So that's the first thing. Second thing is orientation. Now this greenhouse is 6 by 8 feet. It's not a perfect square. It's kind of elongated in a rectangle. We want to orient this east-west with the short ends being on the east-west end. That way the sun comes up in the east, and as it moves through the southern sky, it'll maximize sunlight absorption in the greenhouse. That also gives it a nice long northern wall that you can use for insulation. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, speaking of temperature, it's really important to know what kind of temperature you have in your greenhouse. So I recommend get a thermometer, just like you would use an outdoor thermometer, and hang it in the middle of the greenhouse. That gives you a more accurate reading of what the air temperature is, rather than putting it up against a wall, which would be a little bit warmer or cooler depending on day or night. Now, it's really important to know what your night temperature is, because if you want this greenhouse to stay above freezing, you need to know when it's getting close to 32, so you can supplement with heat. Now let's talk about supplemental heat. Even though the greenhouse is passively solar as far as heating is concerned, at cold winter nights it can still get down close to and often below freezing. So you need to have a backup system. Now take a look at this very small electric heater. Now this has a thermostat, and you can adjust it according to the temperature that you want to make sure it stays in the greenhouse. But this connects to an extension cord right to electricity. You turn that on, and you'll have to adjust it and calibrate it to keep it above whatever temperature you set. I would recommend 35 degrees if you're using this to overwinter. So between your thermometer and the electric heater, that works out real well. But folks, you can do a lot of things to conserve heat loss that's built up during the day. And here are a few simple approaches. First, you can see this greenhouse is placed up against a fence. Now the fence is on the north wall. That's going to help protect against some of the prevailing winds, those northwest winds. And in addition, it's somewhat dark colored. So as the sun shines in the southern sky, it'll heat up that wood and it'll radiate back at night, keeping a small layer of air somewhat warm, kind of an insulation, if you will. But you can add to that. Get some old milk jugs and fill them with water. Then add a water-soluble fertilizer at the recommended rate. So now you've got fertilizer ready to go for some of the plants in the greenhouse, although you shouldn't use much fertilizer during the winter. But then you put these milk jugs on the northern wall of the greenhouse, like this. And the sun will shine down on that fertilizer water, and because it's dark color, it'll absorb that radiant energy. And then at night, it'll radiate heat back out into the greenhouse. And what's neat about these milk jugs is you can stack them, and the more milk jugs you have on that northern side, the more heat conservation that you'll have. Kind of a passive solar heating unit right here. Now, the last thing that you can do to help insulate the greenhouse would be to add a thin layer of air around the outside of the greenhouse. Well, how do you do that? Well, professional greenhouse crop growers actually use a layer of polyethylene plastic, anywhere from 4 to 6 mil. That's the thickness of the plastic, and you can pick that up at most hardware stores. Take a layer of that plastic and run it from one side of the house all the way over to the other. Tack it down, and basically what you've done is created another air layer, a little insulation air layer to help keep in that heat and prevent the heat loss. Even in the wintertime in North Carolina, we can have a warm, sunny day where the temperature inside a greenhouse like this could get up very high, and almost so high that it would hurt the plants. If you don't irrigate frequently, they might dry out, and they could reach some quote-unquote lethal levels. If the temperatures get up about over 95 to 100 degrees, that could be detrimental for some of the plants in the greenhouse, especially if you have not watered them in a while. And of course, come springtime, you've started seeds and they're growing. You definitely need to ventilate to keep the temperature no more than about 90 degrees. Now, the way we do that, at least in a greenhouse kit like this, is it's provided with ventilation. If you look here, you can see this window is louvered, and you can prop it open, and that allows for the excess heat, which rises to ventilate out through that louver. And you just manage the temperature using that little window. If you design your own greenhouse, be sure to incorporate openings that you can vent that hot air out and manage your temperature. Here are some examples of plants that you can protect and grow in your home greenhouse. Now, folks, if you don't have this plant in your own home garden, you really need to have it because it really enhances the outdoor landscape. This is the variegated shell ginger, Alpina zirumbet, and here's a Zone 8 plant. So those of you who live in eastern North Carolina, you can leave this outside. It'll die back to the ground, and the crown will overwinter most of the time in Zone 8. Now, folks, if you live in Zone 7, central North Carolina, and Zone 6, up in the mountains, this plant still is beneficial for your garden, but you need to provide some protection. So there are a couple things you can do. One, you could dig it up out of the landscape before the real cold weather comes, put it in a pot, and bring it in your home greenhouse. Not only will you protect it and overwinter it, but you may actually get some growth. That would be an added benefit. Or, like you can see here, sometimes you can display this plant in a container in and around your patio or deck, and then just move it into the greenhouse to protect it in the wintertime. And that way, this plant will grow year after year after year. Now, let's talk about some of the annuals that you might have in your landscape that you want to carry over to the next year. Coleus. Perfect example of a plant. It's tropical to subtropical. 32 degrees will kill your coleus in the landscape. You'll have to buy new ones next year. Well, what about taking cuttings of your coleus, getting them to root before frost comes, bring them into the greenhouse, and then maintain them as small plants in the greenhouse? Look at this beautiful burgundy-leafed coleus, and this one's well worth keeping. You don't have to pay to buy it again next year, and you'll actually get some growth. As long as the temperature stays above 32, 33 degrees, coleus will grow very nicely, and you'll actually get some positive growth for decoration in that home greenhouse. And then cuttings of other things. Salvia. This is limelight salvia. Now, limelight salvia is a beautiful blue flower with a calyx that's bright, bright yellow, and it would well be worth taking cuttings and overwintering this in the greenhouse. So that's some examples of some of the annuals that you might use. Now, here's a situation where you can actually grow some vegetables. This is Swiss chard, and there are a number of different cultivars in this one container. There's a red and a yellow and the normal Swiss chard. But in this greenhouse, keep temperatures above 35 degrees, you'll get some positive net growth from this plant to the point where you could harvest it, bring it inside, put it in your salads. Or you could even steam it. But it grows very nicely. Now, if you do grow this, the one thing you might want to do occasionally, maybe every 2 to 4 weeks, maybe extend it a little bit, would be to use a liquid fertilizer at half strength to help provide nutrients for this to continue to grow. But you may gauge that based on how much growth you get from the sunlight that you have in the wintertime and the kind of temperatures you get in your greenhouse. Now, look over here. Hibiscus. Well, we've talked a lot about hibiscus. There are temperate hibiscus that grow in the northeast region of the country, in temperate regions. They do fine. Then there are the hibiscus that grow in Florida. That's the example that you see here. It's already started to fade a little bit, but you can protect and keep this plant for next year, this subtropical plant for next year, by putting it in the greenhouse. Now, folks, you might not get a whole lot of positive net growth, but depending on the light and the temperature, you might even get a flower. Look at this. There's a flower bud right here and one right here that might open up. You've got those nice subtropical hibiscus. Now you can buy these, and oftentimes you'll see them at garden centers and at stores that sell plants. Now you can buy them and know that one-time purchasing, you don't have to keep it inside. You don't have to watch it die outside. You put it in your home greenhouse. Now the colocasias, the elephant ears. And you know how much I like elephant ears. Here's a situation where this cultivar called Mojito and this is Black Magic. These two cultivars have been planted in a container and were used for display in the landscape. Just take the container, bring it back here. Now, the cold for Mojito and Black Magic, you know, the colocasias are kind of finicky. Some of them do well in the wintertime in central North Carolina in Zone 7, others don't. Well, some of them really suffer from a too moist situation when they're dormant, and the corms, those bulb-like structures, they rot. Why not bring it into the greenhouse, grow it, you'll actually get leaf growth, and it'll be a nice decoration for your greenhouse. So here are some great examples of plants that you can bring in, protect in the wintertime, even get some growth and decoration from others, but then bring them back out and put them in the garden. The greenhouse is a great place to start seeds of plants you want to have out in your garden, but that can't tolerate frost. You can get them started early in February and March and then get them up into seedlings, then transplant them out into the garden. Not only that, but check out this pot. I've got this pot. It's all ready for basil. I'm going to plant basil seeds here, and I'm hoping they'll grow through the winter, and I'll be able to harvest basil to make pesto and use it for seasoning in the kitchen. Now, this is a great tray for growing seeds because you've got separate packs. This is a little tray that holds them all together. I'm going to plant some nasturtium seeds. So you can see the nasturtium seeds are nice and big, and of course these would not tolerate frost. Each seed goes in each little container, so it's very, very nice. I'll place each one in each of the cell packs, as they are called. So you can see this little package area has 4. Then once I get those in, I'll push them down a little bit more, cover them over, just a little bit, because you really don't need to plant your seeds too deep. Those seeds will germinate, they'll start to grow. I'll get them big enough that they can either go right into the landscape, or I can put them in a larger container, grow them out a little bit more. Once the chance of frost is gone, into the landscape they go. Our plant of the week is a great late fall, early winter flowering evergreen. Now folks, if you have a suggestion for a plant of the week, send it into our Facebook page or our website, and if we use it on the air, we'll send you an In the Garden t-shirt. Well, now the plant of the week is Camellia sasanqua mondel. Now you say, mondel, what does that mean? I know Camellia sasanqua, it's the Sasanqua camellia. This is a late fall, early winter flowering camellia. Now camellias are evergreen, they're large growing shrubs that grow 8 to 10 feet tall and equally as wide. Well, there's a wonderful cultivar called Yuletide, which flowers late in the fall, right between Thanksgiving and Christmas time. Yuletide has big, beautiful red flowers, henceforth the name Yuletide. But this is a cultivar that comes from Yuletide. It was actually a genetic mutation on a branch. Now we in horticulture call that a sport. It was a bud sport, and the branch had these incredibly wonderful pink flowers. Not only are they a different color, but these flowers are incredibly fragrant. So here's a plant called pink Yuletide, cultivar name mondel. Now, partially shady location, great for shrub borders in natural areas. It's a wonderful shrub to use as an accent plant for late fall, early winter flowering. This cultivar has a unique and interesting pink flower. Unlike a lot of the Sasanqua camellias that have solid pink, if you look closely at the flower, you see those beautiful yellow stamens, and the pink petals are actually kind of two-toned with a dark colored pink and a light colored pink. It's a great plant of the week, Camellia Sasanqua Mondel, the pink Yuletide camellia. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for this week. So until next time, I'll be looking for you in the garden.
To register for In the Garden, the course, call NC State's Distance Education Program at 1-866-GO-STATE. That's 1-866-467-8283. Or log on to distance.ncsu.edu. For more information about the program or to suggest a plant of the week, go to unctv.org/inthegarden.
Funding for In the Garden is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more.
Podcasts on unctv.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.